We need a roll call first, Jim.
Happy to do that. President Don Deere.
Here.
Vice President Scott Houston.
Here.
Treasurer Desi Alvarez. Secretary Gloria Gray.
Here.
And immediate past president, Director Harold Williams.
Here.
President Deere, we have a quorum.
Fine, thank you. Is there any public comment?
President Deere, we haven't received any requests for public comment, though I do notice that we have several members of the public joining us today. If there are any members of the public which would like to make a public statement, please let us know by indicating your digital hand. And President Deere, I do not see any requests for public comment, and we do still have a quorum.
Fine, we'll go on to MWD other matters. Are there any? Oh, I'm sorry,
yes.
Discussion items. I skipped number 3, discussion items.
Yes, President Deere, first let me say welcome and Happy New Year to, of course, our members of the Board of Directors, but also members of the public that are joining us today. We do have one item on our discussion items. It's an update on the Colorado River conditions. However, I did want to note for those that are joining us that we will be discussing one other matter under MWD Other Matters, and that'll be a hydrologic conditions update. So we'll add that presentation. It's just a couple of slides, and we were lucky enough to get them at the last minute and secure a speaker at this last minute. So we'll be updating that in the chat. You'll find a link to those slides. So with that, under item 3A, it's an update on our Colorado River conditions. We do have Shanti Rossett, the Colorado River Resources Policy Manager for Metropolitan Water District. Shanti, thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. I apologize, I have a cold and I may be a little hard to hear, but I did want to talk to you about some significant things that are happening in the basin right now. Today, I'm going to talk about a Bureau of Reclamation administrative action that may significantly affect the operation of Lake Powell and Lake Mead through 2026. In November, the Bureau of Reclamation issued a notice of intent to prepare a supplemental environmental impact statement, or SEIS, for the 2007 interim guidelines. The 2007 interim guidelines are the rules that the Bureau of Reclamation uses to operate Lake Powell and Lake Mead. The guidelines define tiers for the coordinated operations of Lake Powell and Lake Mead. Reclamation uses those tiers to determine the volumes of annual releases from Glen Canyon Dam and Hoover Dam. The guidelines also include shortage provisions that set the tiers that determine when Arizona and Nevada would take shortages and the volume of those shortages. And significantly for Metropolitan, the guidelines established intentionally created surplus, or ICS, storage in Lake Mead. Next slide, please. Reclamation's notice of intent to prepare an SEIS for the 2007 interim guidelines described the need for changes to operations of both Glen Canyon Dam and Hoover Dam in 2023 and 2024 to address impacts of low runoff conditions that pose unacceptable risks to operation of these dams. Under the National Environmental Protection Act, or NEPA, revisions to the guidelines requires a review of the environmental impacts of the proposed changes. In this case, Reclamation will prepare a supplemental environmental impact statement. Reclamation's notice of intent indicated that revisions to the guidelines may include reduced annual releases from Glen Canyon Dam and shortages for consumptive uses in Arizona, Nevada, and California. This diagram shows the tiers that are used for coordinated operations of Lake Powell and Lake Mead. The SEIS will analyze modified and/or reduced annual releases from both the mid-elevation release tier and the lower elevation balancing tier. Specifically, reclamation is looking at making less than 7 million acre feet releases from Glen Canyon Dam in order to protect elevation 3490 at Lake Powell. The SEIS will analyze reduced releases to Arizona, Nevada, and California in the shortage tiers. The current version of the guidelines doesn't define how shortages will be taken in Lake Mead below elevation 1025. Next slide, please.
Poor thing.
What slide number are we on?
We're on packet page 5.
Thank
Excuse
you.
me, 7. I apologize. Packet page 7.
Okay.
The SEIS will analyze reduced releases to Arizona, Nevada, and California in the shortage tiers. The current version of the guidelines doesn't define how shortages will be taken below elevation 1025. Pardon me. I got a little behind myself. Reclamation's notice of intent identified 3 primary alternatives that will be analyzed in the SEIS. The framework alternative agreement alternative, which would be a consensus alternative that builds on the basin states, tribes, and NGO commitments made in the 2019 drought contingency plan. The reservoir operation alternative would be reclamation's alternative to mitigate risks to Colorado River reservoirs if a consensus alternative isn't reached or is insufficient to protect dam infrastructure. And they will also analyze a no action alternative, which is really just the current guidelines and programs and agreements that we have in place. Next slide, please. Metropolitan sent an SEIS scope and comment letter to Reclamation and joined a 3-agency comment letter with the Southern Nevada Water Authority and the Central Arizona Project to emphasize our common interest in ensuring health and human safety water for the 27 million residents who live in our 3 service areas. Metropolitan asked that Reclamation select an alternative that protects stored intentionally created surplus. Metropolitan has over 1 million acre feet stored in Lake Mead as ICS, and we want to make sure that that water isn't delivered to other contractors if Lake Mead continues to decline. Metropolitan also asked that Reclamation select an alternative that provides for public health, safety, and welfare storage and deliveries, essentially health and human safety water. Metropolitan asked that any reductions Reclamation makes to protect Glen Canyon or Hoover Dam infrastructure be applied equitably to all Colorado River water users. And Metropolitan's letter asked that the alternative include new conservation for the upper division states and that improvements to the Glen Canyon Dam be made if operations below Power Pool become necessary. Next slide, please. The supplemental environmental impact statement and the post-2026 environmental impact statements are separate processes. The SEIS is expected to only affect reservoir operations through 2026. Reclamation plans to have a final SEIS and record of decision this summer to be implemented in calendar year 2024 as needed. Reclamation has indicated that they plan to publish a notice of intent to prepare an environmental impact statement for the post-2026 operations sometime this month. This would formally initiate development of rules that would take the place of the 2007 interim guidelines when they expire in 2026. Thank you. This concludes my presentation. I appreciate your understanding my goals. I would be happy to answer any questions.
President Deere, I recognize that you're on the phone, but I did want to let you know that Director Russ Lefebvre has raised his hand.
Oh, good. Russell, go ahead.
Shanti, this is Russ. The Metropolitan Water District actually submitted 2 letters. One was a letter with the for the 3-state letter, and one was a separate individual letter. I tried to figure out what the difference was. What is the difference, and why did we do it?
There are only minor differences. Metropolitan asked for additional conservation to be required of the upper division states and the selected alternative, and asked specifically for improvements to Glen Canyon Dam be made if operations are necessary below Power Pool in Lake Powell. We also asked for an evaluation of dry, average, and wet conditions because the notice of intent describes modeling to be done only for the very dry scenarios. And that's not something that the 3-agency letter contained. So they're fairly minor differences, but we did want to include those in our letter. And so we wrote those 2 letters, but they are largely the same.
Has these atmospheric rivers affecting California done anything to the Colorado Basin?
Director Lefebvre, Dimitri is going to be speaking after me, and I will leave that to him. I have not heard about any impacts in the Colorado River Basin yet, but Dimitri may have more up-to-date information.
Thanks, Shanti. That's great. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Shanti, and take care of that cold.
Thank you.
President Deere, I do not see
Okay.
any additional hands.
Okay, AJ, let's go on.
Okay, thank you very much, President Deere. As I mentioned, the next item we have is item 4. It's our MWD Other Matters. Our staff has placed the next coming slides in the chat as a PDF. And I want to say thank you very much to Dimitri Polizos for joining us on such short notice and producing these slides. Again, Metropolitan Water District is always kind of the Johnny on the spot in the industry. And I do want to say thank you to the entire team. Obviously, we're receiving a lot of questions about all the precipitation that we're seeing, not only down here in Southern California, but of course, in Northern California as well. So Dimitri, thank you for joining us, and take it away.
Well, thank you for having me, and good morning, President Deere, members, and other board members. This is great. It's been a while since I've had a chance to talk about a little bit of good news. So wanted to walk us through a little bit about what's happening and how it might impact us and kind of manage some expectations. This is certainly a good start, but I think the theme of this is and I think all of us here at Metropolitan are cautiously optimistic. But let's run through these slides and give you a sense of where we're at. Go ahead to the next. Great. So this is looking at the snowpack in Northern California, and we are certainly receiving some snow with these systems that have been coming through. This is a look at the, on the right-hand side is the monthly snow survey that they conduct. And sure enough, this was taken, I believe, yesterday. There is snow up there. And in fact, we're about 135% of normal, which is good for a good start to the year. But remember last year, we also had a good start. And that graphic on the left kind of shows you we are pretty much where we were last time with respect to the snowpack in Northern California. And remember what happened last year. Unfortunately, January, February, and March pretty much shut down with respect to storm systems. And we actually peaked, the snowpack peaked in January. Now, hopefully that will not happen again. And you'll see in a couple slides here that the forecast is indicating that January is not shutting down. In fact, there is a series of atmospheric rivers, 2 or even 3 from what I can tell, lined up and ready to hit us in this week into next week. But where we are right now is 135% of normal. I expect that to go up to exceed where we were last year. But we'll have to wait and see how much snow actually comes out of these systems as opposed to rain. Why don't we go to the next slide? So I think we're showing the 8-station graphic here. I'm not seeing it. Give you a second. And if need be, I can pop up my slides here as a backup. Yeah, there we go. Great. So this is our 8-station graphic. And for those that are not familiar, the 8-station is essentially 8 stations in Northern California. They give us a sense of the hydrologic conditions. And what this graphic is showing us, there's a lot of information here. The shaded region gives us a sense of the driest and the wettest years that we've experienced. And this record goes back, I think at this point now, a little bit over 100 years. So there's a lot of data that's in here. And so that gives you a sense of our bookends, our driest and wettest encompassed by that shaded region. The average is shown by the dotted blue line, and last year is indicated by the solid white line. And where we are today with respect to essentially the rainfall that these stations pick up is currently at 21.42 inches. So that's above average for this time of year, but still not where we were last year. So there's a lot more we will need to get, to finish the year at average, let alone above average. So these storms that are coming in this week and into next week will certainly increase this. So we'll have to wait and see where we land. And hopefully we will not have a shut off like we saw, later in January or February, like we did last year. Go ahead to the next slide. Okay, so what's happening up in Oroville? That's also an area that we like to look at with respect to, an indication of where our state water project allocation can go to. Right now, the allocation is at 5%. That has not changed. What we're seeing is significant increases in Oroville as expected because of the rainfall. And so what this graphic is showing us is the current year in that lighter blue shaded region. And you can see that we've received 284,000 acre feet, that increase that you see there in the light blue shaded region. That number, if we updated to what we got yesterday, because this is through the 2nd, that number is now a little bit over 300,000. So we're seeing 20,000 or so acre feet a day increases. I expect tomorrow and the next day and the next couple of days to see even greater increases in the reservoir. And that is much needed, because the other information you see on this graphic is obviously we're well away from the capacity, 3.5 million. That's that dashed line at the top. But more importantly is this 1.6 million acre foot line. And that is the amount of water that the department earmarks for regulatory purposes and non-state water project contractor needs. So it's not until we can surpass that line can Oroville provide us any relief or increase or help us increase the state water project allocation. So it's really the projection of the snowpack at this point and how much water the department is expecting to go into the reservoir that gets us above that 1.6 million acre foot mark. It's that additional water that they're projecting above that line that can go towards the allocation. We were supposed to receive an allocation study from the department today. They did not provide one, which is not necessarily a bad thing, because that study would not have included all of the storm activities that we received the last few weeks. The next study is expected to come out before the end of this month, and that study will indicate or reflect the storm systems that we saw. So that study will give us an idea of what they're projecting will go into the reservoir based at least on the storm systems we've seen to date. So that'll give us a sense of where this allocation potentially could increase. So a little patience on that. We'll get that information and we'll be able to provide that to folks at that time. So a little bit later in this month. But again, a lot more is needed. It's not going to take us, it took us a while to get into this drought. Obviously, it's going to take us a lot to get out. So to answer the burning question that I think everyone has been asking me, and I'm sure on your minds, is the drought over? Not quite. We're going to need a little bit more. We're going to need this pattern to continue this year, this whole year, in order for us to kind of dig ourselves out, because there's a lot of holes to fill, Oroville being one of them. Go ahead to the next slide. I think we're transitioning over to the Colorado River. Oh, the forecast. This is a 7-day forecast. I have been looking at these for the last 14, 15 years. I have never seen these colors so widespread across California. That's a good thing. This is indicating what they're projecting this week and next with respect to, I think you probably have heard they're calling this a bomb cyclone. Well, that's what it looks like when you color it onto a map here. Those bright yellow and red colors on this particular map is a good thing with respect to bringing in a lot of moisture into the state, so that they are expecting a lot of water. And unfortunately, that does mean there will be a lot of flooding and mudslides associated with this. Hopefully the damage is not too great, but it will also bring increased elevation or water elevations in Oroville for sure. Go ahead to the next slide. In the upper Colorado River Basin, we have seen these storms also impact in a positive way with respect to snowpack, at least at this point. 142% of normal is where we're at right now. But again, if you look at that graphic on the left, it's pretty much where we were last year at this time. And last year we ended up just below normal overall. So that basin, it's so vast, it takes a lot to keep us at normal, right? We need to keep seeing these storm systems come through. So these storms that are hitting California this week and next will be hitting the upper Colorado River Basin as well. So we'll be tracking this as well as far as where we are or how much improvement we see. But keep in mind, this system in the upper Colorado River has been in a drought for 20 plus years. One good year is not going to get us out of that predicament, and it's going to take multiple wet years to refill the reservoirs, Powell and Lake Mead. Go ahead to the next slide. Okay, so essentially the bottom line here is this is great news, but we have seen good starts in the past that did not end well. So cautiously optimistic. We're going to keep tracking this, but we're hopefully heading in the right direction. Keep in mind, what's happening in the state will certainly help us alleviate or provide relief for the state water project dependent areas. I know West Basin is not necessarily part of that, but for the agencies that are, we will see positive impacts should the allocation increase, certainly for the that section of our service area. Again, we still need to see these storms continue, and we need to see that allocation increase. But with respect to the Colorado River, it's going to take a lot more. The outlook on the Colorado River, as Shanti was talking about, is somewhat bleak. And so with respect to the discussions surrounding the water supply allocation plan for the entire region, it's going to be, we're going to need a lot more than a few, percentages increases on the state water project. We'll be in discussions with the member agencies as far as, how much water do we need from the state to help alleviate a water supply allocation if there is an amount to get to. So that discussion is going to occur. We're starting those with the member agencies later this month. I believe that's on January 18th, where we're going to talk about all of these things. And the hydrologic conditions on both systems are going to play into that, but also into that decision of whether or not to trigger a water supply allocation and how deep, if we were to trigger one, but also the outlook, what we're anticipating in the future on the Colorado will also play a factor in that decision. But that's all I had. Happy to answer any questions, clarify anything that I just mentioned.
Dimitri, thank you for the presentation. President Deere, it looks like Director Russell Lefebvre has his hand raised. I don't know if that was the previous question.
No, me again. I had a question.
Okay.
So Dimitri, last year the actual snowpack wasn't so awful, but the runoff was bad. We expect the same kind of thing?
Well, I don't know quite yet. We'll have to wait and see. The things that made that happen, again, were warmer temperatures and just the dry soils. I'm hoping the soils aren't as dry. I'm speaking about the upper Colorado River Basin because we've seen that disparity there where we have a normal snowpack and very much below normal runoff. So that's one factor is the temperatures. I'm not sensing or seeing that the temperatures this year are much warmer than normal. I'll need to verify that. But along with that is the soil moisture content. So those are the things that played into that or seem to play into that disparity. I'm hoping that with somewhat of a normal year last year, and hopefully a wetter year this year, that we'll get more runoff out of the snowpack than we have in recent years. But again, I don't want to predict. I can't predict this, but I'm hoping for that, and we'll see it in the numbers as we go through the next few months.
Thanks.
Do we have any additional questions from those in attendance?
Guess not.
I don't see any additional questions, President Deere.
Okay. Are there any MWD other matters?
President Deere, that concludes all the information that we have that was ready to present.
Okay. Anything on the consent calendar
None?
for action?
None.
The board information items,
None?
pending items,
None?
other items.
And none there as well.
Are there any announcements?
Just again, I want to say happy New Year to all those in attendance. Obviously returning to the office after a pretty long holiday break. It's great to see this many attendees. So I want to say thank you to everybody. Also, I want to send my regards. Of course, our general manager, Gregory Reed, was not able to join us today, but he wants to say hello to everybody and happy New Year.
Very good. So if that's all, that's the further business that we have. This meeting is adjourned. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.